to talk to you about a call I got from my relative about sending the kids back to school. Apparently, it's time that year already talking about enrolling for next school year. And a big question is, should she send her kids back to school? And she wanted to get my opinion as a doctor. And I have to say, it's a bit complicated question because the answer is not so straightforward. So that's what I want to discuss with you today. So the first thing we want to look at as a doctor, you always make decisions based on risk versus benefit. So the idea is when we recommend a procedure, we may say, hey, you should do this. If we say you should do this, that means it's almost all benefit, very low risk. But many procedures are not quite that way, like chemotherapy, for example. We all know chemotherapy can be very toxic. So that's why we have a discussion. Same with surgery. It could be very dangerous. It could leave you worse off than you came in. So that's why we have to have a discussion. Is the risk worth this potential benefit? And that's the thing. She said, well, my kids will be masked, right? It's like, well, let's go back a little bit. So first of all, for young people, the risk of dying from coronavirus is very low. I think the kids will be around, even if they go to school. But when you get ill, we're seeing that the coronavirus does a lot of other things to parts of your body other than your lungs. And this may be something permanent. A lot of it is immunologic. And so you may have heart troubles, and you don't want to go through life and your doctor sees you when you're 40, like, oh yeah, your heart's not so good, but did you have heart issues when you're young? You're like, oh yeah, I got coronavirus a long time ago. Like, oh, well, I'm sorry. That's no good, right? So we don't actually want them to suffer these consequences of the coronavirus. And that's sort of what we're thinking about is the risk of going back to school. The second thing you want to look at is whether or not there's things that are in your control or out of your control. So we call them external versus internal factors. So circumstances that are outside of control. How much coronavirus will there be in the population in a few months? I don't know. Nobody knows. Right now it's rising, but is it going to come down? Who knows? How other kids will behave at school. Yes, you may think, oh yeah, everybody's going to be well behaved, but not quite that way. I could tell you in San Francisco, I was talking to my friend who lives there. He said 9 out of 10 people on the street when he's out are wearing a mask. I could tell you down in South Bay, less than half. At the grocery store, everybody lines up very nicely, and then you go to the cashier when they're ready, and it's like one big line, and everybody's distancing in line. And they also are limiting the number of people going inside a store. And I can tell you, I've only seen one store in all of South Bay among all the places I've been to that has a limit on how people go into the store. Most stores have no limit. Nobody likes waiting in line for 20, 30 minutes anyways, right? It was Joanne that had a limit of 20 people, and they were very good about keeping everything clean. But most stores are not like that. And most stores, you have a line where you're crowded, right? Because everybody's squeezing into one line or two lanes, and then a new lane opens, and whoosh, there's a massive rush. That's outside of your control. The local environment, what your school is going to be like. You don't know how other kids are going to behave. They'll behave how they'll behave, right? Their parents may teach them well. They may still not listen. Not much you could do about that. Things under your control, whether your kids mask, whether they have good hand hygiene, whether they cough into their elbows, stuff like that. That's good. You could teach your kids well, but she said, well, my kids are wearing masks. If other kids don't, is that a big deal? I would say still the answer is yes, because masks aren't that protective. They're somewhat protective, but you want everybody to wear a mask so they can't spew it out as well. You need both sides. One side's going to do a little bit for you, but it's not doing all that much, because if so, you want a better mask. That's why in a hospital you use at least N95s with patients who are suspected coronavirus. So those are sort of the things I look at. And I guess the best analogy I'd have to say is, looking at this risk of going to school, is what is the benefit of the kid going to school? You think they have interaction with other kids, they learn social skills. That's all good, right? That's also the same decision you make when your kid's being bullied at school. They have a potential interacting with many students who aren't bullies. They can develop lots of social skills. They can make good friends. But let's say your kid's being bullied. Do you take them out of school? Do you try to teach them how to put up with it? I don't know. It's a difficult decision, right? Same with the coronavirus. You just teach them, hey, this is the way the world works. It's very dangerous here in the US. You just have to do what you can, and what happens, happens. Except I think it's too young, right? We'd say for most kids to learn that lesson about bullying, especially when they're in grade school. I think also we think it's probably too young for them to make these big decisions about coronavirus. That's why the parents are making it. I think that's why as a parent, parents would do whatever to take care of their kids. They would sacrifice their lives in a heartbeat for the kids. They'd rather suffer and get the coronavirus than have their kids get it. Though obviously if they get it, their kids are likely to get it too. But the thing is, what do you do in this case? And I think that's where you really have to sit down and decide. They're going to be at risk of the coronavirus when they go to school. The best case scenario, which unfortunately in her case is not possible, is to see how school goes for a bit, not having your kids in school. If the school district reports the cases, wonderful. You can see if the cases are going up because of the school. And if they're not, then maybe you could send your school. It's safer. Their school district's doing a better job. And they are having cases go up, then you don't send your kid to school. Fortunately, with that information, I think it's just a shot in the dark. You can make these decisions. I think the most important thing is to make a decision you're comfortable with living with. And I think for her, probably right now, it's not going to school.